Welcome and thank you for joining Regional Conservation Partnership Program webinar. Before we begin, please ensure that you have opened the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom right of your screen. If you have technical difficulties, please send a message to the event producer. To submit a written question, please type your message in the chat panel in the message box provided. When you are ready to send, hit Enter on your keyboard. All lines have been muted for the duration of the call, and with that, I will turn the call over to Kari Cohen. Kari, please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. This is Kari Cohen. I am the director of the team here in Washington, D.C. that manages the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP, from a national level. And I just want to welcome everyone today to our RCPP Classic Awardee Orientation. Probably many of you were on the phone when we did our applicant webinar last August, and just want to congratulate everyone for running the gauntlet and successfully securing an RCPP Classic Award. There's other members of my team on the phone today, and also quite a few of our state RCPP coordinators. And those are very important folks, as you'll see here today. Today is really probably the last day you'll hear from me unless something goes awfully wrong. The purpose of today's webinar is really just to orient everyone as a group. We have 85 awardees this time around, and really this is just to make sure everyone's on the same page about what to expect over the next little bit as you try to get your projects off the ground. We will go into some detail today. Don't worry if some of it starts to look a little bit Greek to you. Your coordinators will be able to translate a lot of this as you start going through the process of developing your partnership agreement. We'll also make this recording of this webinar available to folks if there are other people on your team or partnership or entity that would like to listen or view this later and review the information. As our host noted, please don't hesitate to submit questions in the chat box. And once we get to the end here, there's a Q&A session that hopefully we'll be able to answer as many questions as we can. We are nearing 230 people on the call today, so that's great. And we'll just get started without further ado here. A quick view at today's agenda. We'll just give a quick overview, of course, and then just give a little introduction. We're going to talk about the structure of what is going to be your programmatic agreement and what a programmatic agreement is. And then we're going to talk about the negotiations that you'll enter into with your state coordinators. We'll talk a little bit about the timeline you can expect for project implementation. And then we'll get into a little bit of detail about your partnership agreement and all the documents that are associated with it. Again, all of this is just in service of getting everyone oriented to what you can expect as you start working with your coordinators to get your projects off the ground. So first of all, again, just want to congratulate everyone for receiving FY 2021 RCPP Classic Award. Last year when we announced the 2019 award back in April of 2020, I believe we announced 48 awards, and this year, of course, we combined 2 years of funding, and so almost doubled the number of awards, and we announced them back on April 26th, and that date is important, as we'll get into. As everyone is aware, RCPP projects are really driven by this partnership, this collaboration between NRCS and your partnerships, and so the partner contributions that you all have committed to these projects are really critical. And as you can see, for every dollar that RCPP and NRCS are investing in these projects, the partnerships are investing $1.32. Over half of the RCPP financial assistance funding was requested in those 85 awards in the land management activity type. This is pretty consistent with prior years. Land management, of course, are the type of activities that sort of mimic what we do through our EQIP or CSP program. Our easement program represents roughly 30% of the funding, and then we've got smaller numbers of the land rental activity type and also the watershed or public works activity type. Just to give you a quick overview. I used this slide last summer when I was doing the applicant webinar. This is just a reminder that of the overall RCPP funding request, at least 70% of the funding needs to go on the ground in what we call financial assistance. So that, again, could be through a land management activity, could be an easement, rental contract, or a watershed public works activity. The other 30% or so is what we call technical assistance, and those are all the activities that are required to help get that conservation on the ground. And you'll remember that I broke down that 30% into what we call enhancement TA. This funding is available for partners to do producer outreach and project management and outcomes activities. And then the bulk of the TA is for what we call implementation TA. 5% of the overall project request is going to be retained by NRCS. I should say at least 5% for our own project management expenses. And then the bulk of this implementation TA can be negotiated. The default is that NRCS is going to maintain that 18% to do conservation planning with producers, to do due diligence activities on easements, and so on and so forth, unless partners can credibly let us know that they want that funding and they can show us that they or a third party or another partner has the capacity and capability to do those TA activities. So again, this is just a reminder of the overall RCPP funding approach. Okay, so this is very important. The first thing you guys are going to do here in the very near future is develop what we call a programmatic partnership agreement. This is very different if anybody that has experience with the 2014 Farm Bill RCPP program where you entered into an MOU with NRCS or a cooperative agreement. Starting with the 2018 Farm Bill, we have moved into what we call a programmatic agreement space. And this is sort of similar to an MOU in that, as you can see here, because it's highlighted in blue, your partnership agreement, and this is the first thing you're going to negotiate, doesn't have any funds obligated or associated with it. And you might be thinking, well, that's kind of weird, but it's sort of similar, again, to the way the MOUs ran in the old program. But really, we created this structure to be very flexible and allow us to have maximum flexibility as we try to implement these projects with you all. So we'll talk about what the PPA does here in a minute. We call this the PPA. You'll hear me say PPA over and over again. Here you'll see that at least 5% of technical assistance that NRCS is going to maintain. Underneath the partnership agreement, we've got potential for land management and land rental producer contracts. And as you can see, those funds are obligated directly to a producer or landowner. And the same with U.S.-held easements. Remember, for RCPP, we have the potential for two different types of easements, both U.S.-held and entity-held. And these U.S.-held easements, of course, the funds are obligated directly to producers or landowners. Also underneath the PPA as part of your project, you can have these sorts of things that are in green here. And in green, you can see that we are obligating funds directly to a partner. These are called supplemental agreements. That's the funding vehicle, and I'll get to this on the next slide. So through these supplemental agreements, we can transmit partner technical assistance funding, any entity-held easement funding, or any funding associated with watershed or public works activities. So, very important, what is a supplemental agreement? It is a new NRCS funding vehicle. We literally created this out of whole cloth over the past year and a half. And so if folks are familiar with working through cooperative agreements or contribution agreements or even grant agreements with NRCS, you're in for a different kind of ballgame here. And again, in RCPP Classic, we use supplemental agreements to obligate TA funds to partners, entity-held easements, and watershed or public works agreements. The beauty of a supplemental agreement is that it really provides flexibility to obligate project funding as needs arise. In the old program, we had to, because of the way the the program was structured, if there was TA that was provided to a partner, it was generally provided all up front at the beginning of a project. And while that may seem attractive to a partner, it led to all kinds of problems throughout the course of a 5-year RCPP project. And so the beauty of a supplemental agreement is that you can have, 4, 5, or even more supplemental agreements as the course of a project unfolds, and it has that sort of flexibility built into it. It's very important to understand that supplemental agreements are not grants. We're not just, again, turning over $1 million and saying, hey, here's your 2 deliverables, come back and give us, your request for reimbursement. These supplemental agreements, because of the way they're structured, really requires that NRCS and partners have a mutual understanding of how partners are evaluating their proposed expenditures. For example, if you're going to do conservation planning, if you're going to do outreach activities, how are you valuing those activities? And then, of course, understanding the documentation that's required for us to reimburse you. Very important. We had an OIG audit of RCPP, and it uncovered some serious challenges for NRCS with how we were paying technical assistance funding to our partners. And so, again, all of this is partially an attempt to make sure that we have financial integrity with RCPP and that we are paying for credible expenses. Okay, so with all that out of the way, we're going to talk about the negotiations that you're going to enter into with your state coordinator. If you have a multi-state project, you're really going to interface most directly with the lead state. We always ask our partners to identify a lead state, and every project is going to have a lead state, and your lead state coordinator will be the person that you are going to do the negotiations with. So let's talk about what a negotiation means. When we made those award announcements on April 26th, and hopefully in the notification that was provided to you, it indicates that the awards are tentative and subject to finalization through negotiation. It could be that when we dig into the details of a partner contribution, it may not be eligible, or there may be specifics of the project that may be a little bit different. So we always say that awards are tentative until they are finalized through this negotiation, and you end up with a programmatic partnership agreement, or PPA. Here's some of the things that your negotiation may address. It could address project funding, the amount of FA versus CA, exactly how you plan to implement the activity, whether it's land management or easement or what have you. Just talked about partner contributions, and then also how the initial implementation of your project is going to unfold. It's also during this negotiation that lead partners can request a few things. One, they can request AGI waivers, and we'll get into that. They can request FATA ratio waivers. For example, if you want a waiver from that 70-30 split that I talked about earlier, and you actually want to spend 80% of the project funding on financial assistance, through the negotiation process is when you can request a waiver for that. And then any policy waivers. Once you get into things with your coordinator, if it looks like you need some sort of policy waiver, your coordinator can help walk you through that process. Few things negotiations cannot change. They cannot change the lead partner. The lead partner and their ability to carry out and manage their RCPP project was a big part of why these awards were selected. So we cannot change the lead partner. We also can't change the project area, nor can we change the conservation benefits that you all outlined in your proposal. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the timeline. You guys are all in a really nice position. As I mentioned earlier, we announced the 2019 awards back in April 2020, just about a year before we announced your awards. And it wasn't until, I think, December or maybe November of 2020 that those folks could actually go into the portal and finalize their PPA. And that's because we, RCPP being sort of a new program in the 2018 Farm Bill, we've been building it as we've gone along, and we had to build our software to support these new PPAs. That's not the case for you all. You can begin negotiations with your lead state coordinator tomorrow. You can begin this afternoon after this webinar. And as soon as you can possibly get moving and work with your coordinator to develop your PPA, get it signed off on by my staff, you can execute your PPA. So that can happen in the month of May. It can happen in the month of June. It can happen very rapidly, is what I'm saying. And that's quite a contrast from both the 2014 Farm Bill projects and also last year's 2019 projects. The other important thing to note is that partner contribution expenditures are creditable as of the day we made the award announcement. This is in the RCPP statute. So, as of April 26th, if you all were out there doing producer outreach, if you started project management activities, things like that you plan to count as partner contributions, they are creditable as long as they are eligible and ultimately included in the PPA. So if you've already started, you may want to check in with your coordinator, double check that those contributions are eligible and that they can be included in your forthcoming PPA. Remember that I said there's no funding associated with those PPAs. Well, the next step after you execute your PPA would be to go ahead and develop a supplemental agreement if you want to, and if you have enhancement TA as included as part of your project. So if you need to start charging NRCS for project management activities, for eligible producer outreach activities, for eligible outcomes activities, you can start developing that supplemental agreement as soon as your PPA is executed. So again, if you execute your PPA here in May, you can turn around and with your coordinator develop a supplemental agreement for enhancement TA and be off and running just as soon as you can get that executed. Sorry, there may be some pauses while I take a drink of water. Okay, it's very important that you discuss the initial timeline with your state coordinator with regard to how you see this project unfolding, especially for financial assistance. Here we are in May of 2021. The federal fiscal year ends September 30th. And given the timing of these awards and the fact that PPAs may not be executed until the end of this month or even June or July, really the optimal approach for these projects, we feel, is to schedule your first financial assistance obligations in 2022. And this would include land management rental activities, easements, or public works activities as appropriate for your project. That is not to say that a project can't go ahead and try to hold a producer contract sign-up for land management activities this year. But it probably would not be optimal for a variety of reasons that we won't get into today. But you can certainly discuss it with your RCPP coordinator and they can give you some of those details. But just think carefully about how to schedule those financial assistance activities with your partnership and with your coordinator. If you were to schedule your first FA activities in 2022, basically this first 6 to 9 months of your project would feature any enhancement TA activities, again, project management, if you need to hold project meetings with the partnership, if you want to start doing producer outreach with producers in the project area, sort of getting things going and setting the stage for the financial assistance activities, plus, of course, any partner contribution expenditures. To go into a little bit more detail on these different activities for land management rental, as I mentioned, it is currently available, but the optimal approach is to delay till 2022. For RCPP easements, we've got our due diligence and sign-up guidance coming soon for RCPP easements. Right now, our entity-held easement minimum deed terms are available on the RCPP website, and very soon, the U.S.-held template deeds will be up on the same website. They're just going through agency clearance as we speak. For those folks with easements as a part of their projects, you're going to want to schedule those easements, of course, into future years. According to best estimates, it can take some time to close an easement. You just want to talk through that with your coordinator. I believe we only have one watershed or public works activity project this time around. I just want to schedule those deliverables realistically, understanding that we need an NRCS-approved watershed plan and design prior to being able to obligate any construction financial assistance. All right. So with that timeline discussion out of the way, we're going to get into a little bit of detail about what is in your PPA. When you start talking with your coordinator, they're going to start showing you some of these documents and want you to have at least some understanding of all the things that go into a PPA. Effectively, the first thing is the agreement itself, and then there's a bunch of exhibits attached to it, and it really depends on what your project is going to be doing as to how many exhibits you're going to have. And then there are also some attachments. Again, the PPA is kind of created based on templates that have been developed by my staff here at the National Office. As I mentioned earlier, it establishes the project budget, but it does not obligate funding. So it basically says this much will be spent on land management activities, this much will be spent on easements, this much will be spent on enhancement TA, this much will be spent on this type of partner contribution, and so on and so forth. But no funding is actually going out through these CPAs. It establishes a framework for the project. It describes the responsibilities of NRCS and the lead partner. And these tables of deliverables are very important. There's one table for partner contributions and also a table for financial assistance deliverables and TA deliverables. It lays out the duration of the project. Most of these projects can be 5-year projects. Any modifications that are needed ultimately down the line, and then also what are the terms of any terminations that would occur, which we don't anticipate, of course, but sometimes occur with these projects. You also collaborate with your state coordinator to develop a project map. We've been doing these collectively after we make these awards so that we have a consistent mapping protocol so that ultimately we'll be able to show all of these RCPP projects on a single map. And, of course, there's lots of legal language that is included as part of a PPA. All right, I mentioned exhibits. There's, again, you might have 1 or 2 exhibits as a part of your project. If you have lots of different activities going on, activity types, you may have more. If you are strictly a land management project, you would just fill out the land management exhibit. You may also have some enhancement technical assistance, which has its own exhibit. But basically, these are all activity-based exhibits. And here's an example of what is in an exhibit. This is from the land management activity. It kind of, you work with your coordinator to lay out the resource concerns that the project is going to address through land management activities. You'll get into, are we going to give priority to historically underserved producers? What are the land use types? Is this a cropland project? Is this a grazing land project? Is this a forestry project? If the partner is planning to bundle contracts and present them to NRCS for priority ranking, you can describe that here. If there's conservation practices you want to target, for example, if you have a soil health project and you just want to target sort of 3 practices, you would want to describe that here. If you want to deviate from NRCS's typical payment rates, you would talk about that in this exhibit. The exhibit will also get into the adjusted gross income provision, any innovations that the partners wish to introduce to the land management activity, and then any implementation technical assistance details. Again, this is where you and NRCS collaboratively will get into the details of your project so that we both have a mutual understanding of how the project is going to unfold, how your land management activities are going to unfold over the course of your 5-year project. For land management and rental activities, you're going to want to work with your state coordinators to think about sign-ups, ranking tools. I mentioned partner bundles. Effectively, again, how is this going to roll out over the course of the project? For most projects, all LMR, we kind of have taken to abbreviating land management and rental because we are doing both of those activity types in a single contract. All LMR obligations are going to occur through producer contracts between NRCS and a producer. The vast majority of LMR obligations are going to happen that way. There is also an option to obligate through supplemental agreements when a partner is involved. but that's going to be few and far between. It gets a lot more complicated, and your coordinator can walk through that option with you if it makes sense. Here's a quick example for our entity-held easement exhibit, and I'm just walking through a couple of the main types of exhibits because, again, most of the program is in land management and in easements. Similar to land management activity, you'll walk through the resource concerns, the historically underserved activities, the characteristics of eligible entities. These are entity-held easements. What are the entities that are going to be holding those easements? We need to know that information. What types of easements do you want to get into? Are these strictly for wildlife habitat and other activities are going to be restricted on the land in question? Or are these working lands easements? Have you identified parcels in your proposal that you want to fund that are going to be high priority for the project? Sometimes people know that in advance. Are there going to be parcels that the partner wants to bring to NRCS in a bundle? Is Buy, Protect, Sell something that the partnership wants to pursue? We are just getting ready, we're in the process of rolling out the agency's Buy, Protect, Sell guidance from the 2018 Farm Bill. To call it complicated is probably an understatement, but we do make Buy, Protect, Sell available in our CPP, and you'll want to note in this exhibit and talk through with your coordinator if that's something your partnership wants to pursue. And then again, some of these other items similar to land management and rental. A little bit more detail on RCPP easements and due diligence funding. Due diligence activities for easements relate to, having to do surveys or title searches. You're going to want to work with your state RCPP coordinator to determine how you're going to make those due diligence activities happen. Would you like NRCS to contract with a third party? We often have contracts with surveyors or appraisers to do those sorts of things. Or we can provide the funding to partners to do those activities. In the case of entity-held easements, RCPP can only pay for the types of things that NRCS is responsible for: conservation planning, appraisal reviews, and hazardous materials record searches. All the other things that go into easement due diligence are the responsibility of the partners for entity-held easements. This is all information that was in the Notice of Funding Opportunity for RCPP last summer. When it comes to acquisition of easements, again, you're going to want to coordinate with your state coordinators on how to do sign-ups for easements and ranking tool development. For entity-held easements, that funding is going to be obligated to the partner that's going to be holding the easement through a supplemental agreement, as we mentioned earlier. For U.S.-held easements, those, again, are contracts between NRCS and the landowner directly. Let's talk a little bit about technical assistance. Oftentimes, for enhancement technical assistance, or TAE as we call it, a lot of times those needs are known at the outset of a project. For example, if your partnership knows that you're going to do wildlife habitat monitoring or water quality monitoring, or you need to do modeling activities, you know the producer outreach and project management activities you're going to be undertaking. In those cases, it may make sense to obligate most or all of the technical assistance for enhancement activities through a supplemental agreement right at the beginning of a project. It doesn't have to be, but it might make sense. You can talk it through with your coordinator. Conversely, for implementation TA, those needs may not be known until you start implementing your FA activities. Again, implementation TAs are things like conservation planning, practice design, installation, etc. And again, you may not know those things right off the bat. Generally speaking, implementation TA should not be obligated in its entirety at the beginning of a project. Again, this comes back to the whole idea of supplemental agreements and this idea that it's a flexible tool and that we really should only be obligating technical assistance for implementation as specific needs materialize. Okay, let's talk about the adjusted gross income provision of the Farm Bill. hopefully, as everyone here is aware, the Farm Bill contains this adjusted gross income limitation, above which producers and landowners are not eligible to participate in a USDA program. Sorry for the typo there in number 1. I should say AGI. So for RCPP, we actually have unique AGI authorities, which give our partners 2 options when it comes to AGI. The first is to request during your project negotiation, and this is the only time you can request it. So if you end up with a PPA and then you realize later, whoops, we should have done this applicability waiver, it's too late. So you need to think very carefully with your partnership and with your coordinator about whether an applicability waiver makes sense. And what an applicability waiver is, it's unique to RCPP. It means is that it renders AGI, it makes it such that AGI does not apply to the entire project. So let's say you're working with 10 landowners and putting easements on 10 parcels, and you get an AGI applicability waiver. Well, those landowners don't even need to get an AGI determination from FSA and the IRS. Basically, AGI doesn't apply to the project, which is pretty nice for RCPP. It's a unique waiver authority, as I mentioned. However, there needs to be a justification for why the partnership wants us to waive AGI for the project. We're not going to do it just because it makes things easier for you or just because you want it. There needs to be a valid reason. And often that can be, hey, we know that we need to conserve these lands in this place for this wildlife corridor, and these happen to be the landowners that are in that place, and they happen to be over AGI. Well, maybe that makes sense from a resource concern perspective for us to waive AGI for the project. So you just need to think about that and think whether it's justified for your project. If AGI is not waived for the entire project, individual producers or landowners that are participating in your project can still request AGI waivers through the general Farm Bill AGI waiver process. It's really built for lands of what are called special environmental significance, and the same waiver process exists for EQIP and CST and other NRCS Farm Bill programs. So 2 options for AGI, and again, you can talk about this with your coordinator. Something else that's a part of your PPA is what we call a confidentiality attachment. As many of you know, the Farm Bill includes what we call the 1619 privacy provision that really restricts what type of information about our program participants that NRCS can share with the public or with anybody, really. And so this confidentiality attachment kind of describes the partner responsibilities related to the privacy of landowner and producer information. We understand that our partners need information about the activities that are being carried out for your project to be able to report on outcomes and things like that. So we developed this attachment to sort of describe the information that's going to be shared between the lead partner and NRCS. And it also includes what we call a cooperator agreement to be signed by the lead partner. This basically allows for this information sharing and ensures that the lead partner understands their responsibilities under Section 1619 of the Farm Bill should we share producer information with you. There does include, this attachment includes an exception in the case of state agencies. Sometimes state agencies, when they're lead partners of these projects, because of state laws, they're unable to sign a Section 1619 cooperator agreement. I won't get into all the details here today, but you can get into them with your state coordinator if that applies to you. All right, I think we just have about 5 more slides, and then we're going to get into the Q&A, and I see that there's already some questions coming into the chat box. So all of you, when you submitted your proposals, described how you plan to report on the environmental outcomes of your project. And this has been a point of emphasis in the 2018 Farm Bill, not just for RCPP, but for other NRCS programs. Remember that what an environmental outcome is For any project, you're going to put a bunch of stuff into the project, including funding, technical, and customer service. You got activities, conservation planning, outreach. You're going to put things on the ground. Then we're going to get some output, right? We're going to have, some number of land management contracts or easements or so many cover crop practices or, this many animal waste structures built as part of your project. But then the outcome is really what the difference does that make for the environment or for the economics or financial well-being of those producers that are participating, or for the community in the case of social benefits. To get at those outcomes and to help us understand how the partnership plans to report on those outcomes, there's an attachment as a part of your PPA. And that attachment kind of describes or has you list both NRCS and lead partner responsibilities when it comes to developing and reporting on outcomes. And then there's also a narrative that we ask our partners to fill out that kind of describes their outcomes reporting approach. How do you plan to develop baseline data? How do you actually plan to report on outcomes? Are you going to do monitoring, modeling? Are you going to use some best scientific estimate or something else? Is there support for your outcomes approach in scientific literature or elsewhere? Who is going to be involved in these outcome activities for you? Sometimes projects, have a partner involved strictly to do the outcomes activities. We want to know who's going to be doing this stuff. Also, if you're doing economics or financial outcomes and social outcomes, we want to know about that as well. Again, conservation or environmental outcomes are required. Economic and social are optional, but honestly, we're always happy to see how many of our partners take this to heart and are really interested in digging into the economic and social outcomes. And then also we want to know kind of what are your annual timelines and milestones? When do you plan to start your outcomes activities? Obviously, we want outcomes reported at the end of the project to the extent possible, even though we know that in some cases, project activities will carry on well after a project expires. An important note here, your outcomes must be reported for the totality of project activities, so not just those that are funded by NRCS. So let's say through NRCS you fund 7 conservation easements for gopher tortoise habitat, and it turns out partner contributions are used to fund another 3 easements. Well, your outcomes really should report on all 10 easements and, the outcomes associated with putting those easements on the ground. It shouldn't just be the NRCS-funded easements. All right, there will also be information in your PPA about reporting. So for RCPP projects, we do require an annual progress report, and you will fill that out in the portal. Some of the report will be filled out by your state coordinator, and some will be the responsibility of the partner. We've also got a final report that is required in the portal at the end of your project, and also a fact sheet that we can use, for public information purposes. Your annual reporting in the portal will get into progress on your deliverables. So when you schedule out your deliverables in your PPA, those will come back when you go into report annually, basically updating us on how you did in the past year and whether you are on schedule, including for contributions. There's also basic project information we're looking for, including the number of producers you've engaged, the demographics of those producers, and how are you doing on outcomes. Now, at the end of year 1 of your project, we don't anticipate that you're going to be able to report on outcomes yet, but you may have started water quality monitoring, or you may have started digging into how you're going to model the outcomes of your project. You can just kind of report on the progress of any of your outcomes activities. I'm going to take a little drink here. Okay. So this is the last slide. I just want to note a few important things about customer service and how we are here to help you throughout the life of your project. As I mentioned earlier, your state coordinator is really the first line communicator for you. All of these projects are managed and administered at the state level. Here at the national level, we develop national policy, we develop templates for state use, And we really get involved in projects usually only when there's a problem, unfortunately. It's kind of like the dean's office. So by and large, you may never, correspond with me again or any of my staff because the state coordinator is really the person that's going to be managing and administering your project. Again, this programmatic agreement approach that we have developed under the 2018 Farm Bill is really meant to be flexible. We should be able to reimburse folks much faster than anybody experienced under the 2014 Farm Bill. We have these flexible supplemental agreement obligations. It's much easier through this PPA process to manage your agreements. When we have to amend your PPA because the deliverables are all out of whack and, boy, we didn't close on those 2 easements like we planned this year and we need to move them back 2 years, well, we can do that very easily, whereas under the 2014 Farm Bill, it was much more of a chore to make amendments to these PPAs. We've also really streamlined that annual reporting for anyone with experience under the 2014 Farm Bill project. You may have had nightmares about the annual reporting activities. Hopefully you'll be pleasantly surprised at the end of your first year when you go in to do your annual report, and you'll see some of the streamlining that we've put in place here for the 2018 Farm Bill project. And finally, by statute, NRCS is required to report to lead partners 2 things. Every 6 months, we have to provide a report describing the status of each pending and obligated producer contract as a part of any project. And we also have to provide an annual report describing what NRCS used our NRCS used TA for. So any technical assistance funding that NRCS used, we need to let partners know what we used it for. So you can plan on getting that reporting throughout the course of your project. I see that Jill has quoted here in the chat that she did have nightmares from the annual reporting last time around. Okay, now we've reached the fun part of today's webinar. I did that in 45 minutes, and I kind of raced through it, so I'm sure you have a lot of questions. We've got, I think, 30 minutes left time for the Q&A. I may ask some of my fellow staff members who are on with me today to assist, because honestly, they know everything and I just know a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to work my way back to the top. Someone's asked, is this orientation being recorded and will the recording be available to review in the future? As I mentioned at the top, yes, this recording will be available and you can share it with other folks in your partnership that may need to get this information. Okay, here's a question about supplemental agreements for TA. It says, do we need separate supplemental agreements for implementation TA and enhancement TA, or can they be in one agreement? The answer to that, Jill, is that they can be in a single agreement, but again, you're only really should be putting into an agreement the technical assistance for implementation activities that you know you need to do. So it shouldn't just be, hey, we know over the course of this project we're going to do conservation planning. Well, it should be more like we're going to do 10 conservation plans this year because we know that's what we need to do. Danielle's asking, are lead partners expected to report on CA or FA on SF425? Says financial assistance does not go through the lead partner's books, so it's difficult for us to track the financial assistance. So the SF425, for those of you familiar with the 2014 Farm Bill program, has gone away. Because we are no longer working through our grants and agreements division and we have these programmatic partnership agreements, all the reporting for RCPP is going to happen through the portal, which you are all familiar with. Your PPA is going to be developed in the portal. Your supplemental agreements are going to be developed in the portal. All your reporting will happen in the portal. The FA portion of your project reporting will happen, will be carried out by your coordinator. And so, as I mentioned earlier, some of the annual reporting will be the responsibility of a coordinator. Some will be the responsibility of the partner. and the FA is on the coordinator side of the house. C, can you explain how project management and administration is itemized under TA? I'm feeling confused. Sorry, Molly. RE, the non-negotiable percentages to NRCS. The only non-negotiable thing with regard to TA is the 5% of the overall project funding that NRCS is going to maintain. And that's, again, to pay our RCPP coordinators to manage your project throughout the life of the project. And so that's really the only non-negotiable percentage. All the rest is just, as you saw in the NFO when we put it out, up to 7% of the project funding can be retained by the partner for enhancement activities, and the other implementation TA can either be used by NRCS or it can be split between NRCS and the partner. There's a question here from Dan that I mentioned that partner contribution can be negotiated during PPA development. Is that still true? Is it true that the contribution ratio cannot be negotiated? That is true. I mentioned earlier that partner contributions are really critical parts of these projects. Our leadership takes very seriously the responsibilities and the investments that our partners are making to these projects. So if your proposal said that you're going to match NRCS funding 2-to-1, and you come to us during the negotiation and say, well, we actually had a couple partners drop out, and now we're looking at 1.3-to-1. NRCS reserves the right to provide a smaller award to you. We really try to maintain those contribution ratios. It really reduces the credibility of the agency and the program when we allow partners to put anything they want in the proposal, and then when it comes time to the award phase or the negotiation phase, they're backing off of contributions. So the contribution ratio is very important. What I was mentioning earlier was the eligibility of contributions. It might be that coordinators are going to take a closer look during the negotiation process at the eligibility of contributions. Partners can also come to us and say, hey, since we submitted this proposal last November, we've had 2 more partners come to the table and we've got more contributions. Well, isn't that great? We can record those as part of the PPA. Okay, just taking a look at the questions here. Again, there's a question from Danielle about SF425. We're kind of going to walk away from the SF425 again. You will see when it comes time to report on your contributions in the portal at the end of your first year that you are going to be reporting on those contributions as laid out in your PPA. So you're going to actually develop a table of contribution deliverables that says in this first year of the project, here's are going to be our contributions. In the second year, here's what our contributions are going to be. And then at the end of each year, you're going to be asked to say, hey, how did we do? Did we, fulfill our contributions as we described in the PPA? And so it's really, an effort to tie back each year to the initial PPA and hold partners accountable for what you had lined up at the beginning of your project. I will say, however, that all partners are really required to maintain auditable documentation of your contributions. It's quite likely that we will be undergoing audits of RCPP during the life of your project. And one thing that auditors often want to see are auditable records of contributions. So even though you're going to report, some summary level, at some higher level of summary of your contributions each year, you really need to be able to justify that. And if we come to you and say, hey, this $1 million, show us some more details about whose salary was covered, what easement, that represents, we need to have that documentation on hand, or actually it should say partners need to have that documentation on hand. All right, just moving through here. Someone asked, Diane asked, for the easement due diligence guidance that I mentioned is coming soon, do you think that will be days, weeks, or months? Diane is really trying to pin me down. I wouldn't say that it's months. I would say it's weeks to a month. We've got some easement stuff in clearance right now, and I'm not exactly sure where the due diligence stuff is, but it should be coming soon. So it definitely won't be months, but it may not. It's definitely not going to be days. Probably somewhere between weeks and a month. How's that, Diane? I hope that helps. Someone, again, was asking about the recording of this webinar. Just hang tight. Your coordinator will be in communication with you. Once we are able to make it available to the coordinators, they'll be able to make it available to you. Someone's asking about implementation. Isn't implementation considered FA rather than TA? We use the term implementation TA to sort of differentiate between those enhancement TA activities. Implementation TA are all those activities that are happening directly with the landowner or producer that is required to get the financial assistance on the ground. So again, in the case of a land management activity, maybe you need to design a waste management structure or design a prescribed grazing fencing approach, do conservation planning, do checkout once the structure is built or something like that. All of that is considered implementation technical assistance.
Do you mind if I add just a little bit to that response?
I'm sorry?
Do you mind if I add just a little bit to the line between FA and TA? I think it's one that confuses folks that aren't in RCS. So Seth Fiedler with the projects team, I work for CARI, and I just sort of wanted to add that on the FA-TA line, when you start to think about implementation TA, there are NRCS practice standards and requirements that go with every step that Kari just mentioned. So planning, design, installation, and checkout are sort of our most common implementation TA tasks. And we have very specific requirements for those. So before you as a partner assume that you're willing and able to step into those, make sure you have those detailed conversations with your state coordinator so that they can relay the actual requirements involved in those steps. In many cases, it's going to be most practical for partners to focus on enhancement TA tasks and relegate the implementation TA tasks to NRCS. And if not, there's certainly cases where we would want to use a supplemental agreement and avail ourselves of the partner's expertise. We just want to make sure that both NRCS and the partners understand the actual requirements associated with those implementation TA tasks. And don't put your PPA budget together without having that conversation, because it'll end up meaning amendments in the long term. So again, focus on that line that you're asking about here in your questions with your state coordinators, and make sure those things that you propose to do as implementation TA on the partner side are things that you can realistically do.
Very good. Thank you for that expansion, Seth. I'm actually going to kick this next one back over to Seth. Ernest is asking, can an applicability waiver for AGI pertain to just one activity type? For example, if a project has both easements and land management rental, can it pertain to just easements but not the land management section? And Seth, I can't remember where we came down on that. Seth, if you're out there, you may be on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, it is currently set up in the portal exhibits to request by FA activity. So you could very explicitly request it in the land management exhibit for land management activities, or you could request it in the land management exhibit for all activities if you had more than one. So it's an either-or situation.
Very good. Bill is asking, are there available templates for these PPA documents, and especially the PPA, the exhibits, and the outcomes? Absolutely. We here at the National Office develop the template PPA and all the template exhibits and attachments. You will get into those with your coordinator as soon as you want to or are able to. Who knows? Your coordinator may be on vacation next week, but soon enough, you will get to see all of those documents. Are there templates available for partner contribution to ensure that you are collecting the right documentation on partner contributions from starting on April 26th? Mary, you might just chat with your coordinator to make sure that you understand what sorts of documentation you should have on hand for your partner contributions, and talk to them just to make sure that all those contributions you expended starting on April 26th are going to be eligible and included in your PPA. It says here from Danielle, should partner contributions be reported in performance reports and not financial reports? Again, I think there's probably some harkening back to the 2014 Farm Bill experience. We do not have separate financial reporting from our annual reporting. Back in the day, you might have had to fill out these SF425 financial reports plus your performance reports. It's just not the case going forward. And so there'll just be a single annual report that'll be in the portal. You don't have to worry about separate reporting requirements. Sorry, you guys asked a lot of good questions. I'm just clicking through here, trying to get to as many as I can in the next 15 minutes. Okay, Kevin's asking, if another partner entity in the project is going to assist with data collection or monitoring of the project, will they be able to access data via the 1619 provisions of the PPA, or is that only for the lead partner? Seth, do you want to take that one and how that works with the lead partner signing the 1619 cooperator attachment?
I would love to, Kari. So the way that 1619 confidentiality template works at the PPA level is the lead partner is signing up to safeguard all project information. If they're going to turn around and engage another partner or a contractor to facilitate that work that the lead partner is doing, say related to contributions or outcomes, it's the lead partner that has already signed up to safeguard that information. They need to make sure that they, in turn, can expect that same level of security from the contractor or subsidiary partner because it's the lead partner that signed the contribution agreement. The programmatic partnership agreement and its confidentiality agreement. There is another opportunity at the supplemental agreement level. For instance, if we were going to enter into a supplemental agreement with a non-lead partner to do some enhancement TA activities related to outcomes, then that supplemental agreement comes with its own confidentiality agreement, and in that case, we would actually collect from the awardee partner, the non-lead partner from the project, a separate confidentiality agreement that would then put that awardee partner performing the outcomes work directly on the hook to NRCS to follow the rules. So it really just depends on that contractual relationship and whether it's through the PPA partner side arrangement with a sub or through a supplemental NRCS arrangement with a sub. In both cases, we as NRCS have the expectation that the confidentiality agreement will be followed, and it follows that chain.
Thank you, Seth, for that very thorough and enlightened response. Okay, Alan is asking, is there a maximum payment amount to a producer for a land management activity? So you may have read in the funding announcement that there are flexibilities around how much a producer can get for a land management activity under RCPP. And that is true. Our starting points are always the payment schedules that NRCS uses with programs like EQIP and CSP, but there are flexibilities. If it's justifiable for partners to want to pay a higher rate for some reason, you can talk that through with your coordinator. NRCS will never pay more than 100% of the cost of implementing a land management activity. And I will say that this is another reason why folks may want to think about delaying until 2022. The start of their land management financial assistance activities. Due to some software challenges this year, we are really limited to those payment schedule rates for FY21. We anticipate being able to have those flexibilities that we always had anticipated having there in FY22. Good question, Alan. John is asking, how do we address indirect or overhead costs? Hopefully you remember from the funding announcement that NRCS is statutorily prohibited from paying for any overhead or indirect costs using RCPP funding. Partners, if you had it in your proposal, you can charge or credit administrative costs or overhead costs as part of your partner contributions, and there are rules around that. All that is kind of laid out in the funding announcement. But just make sure that you understand that we cannot pay any administrative or indirect costs using RCPP funding. John, I see your question about internal legal review of agreements. I'm not sure what that means. If you want to provide a little bit more detail, I can try to respond to that one. Larry Hicks says, when can we expect finalized agreements? Again, if you have a fairly straightforward project, it has a single activity type, like it's just easements or it's just land management, you know, things can move very quickly for a PPA. What happens is you talk to your coordinator, you work out the exhibits, you work out the attachment, the deliverable tables, and the contribution tables, and then it gets submitted to my staff here at NHQ. We just have to check it out and review it, make sure it's on the up and up. And once, you know, you get national concurrence, you're actually going to sign it digitally in the portal, and off you go. So, again, it could still happen this month if you get started tomorrow and move through it fairly quickly. You can get a PPA done this month. So it's really exciting for us here on the RCPP team to be able to get these projects up and running within a month even of making these awards, whereas under the 2014 Farm Bill, there were sometimes, 17 months that went by between when the project got started and when the awards were made. So it's a new day for RCPP, and we're really excited about that. Dave is asking, what is included in the 5% TA reserved for NRCS? Is it to be included in the programmatic agreement? So that's a good question. It certainly, I think, indicates that the 5% is reserved for NRCS in that agreement, and that 5% is reserved for project management. So, for example, NRCS is required to do highly erodible land and wetland conservation compliance checks for all producers involved in RCPP contracts. We're required to do NEPA activities for all financial assistance activities, and the AGI activities, all those sorts of things that NRCS has to do and we can't delegate to anybody. Those are the types of things that we're going to be spending that technical assistance on. And again, we have to report to you once a year what we've spent our technical assistance on.
I'll just add to that one, Kari, that as far as scheduling NRCS use TA, whether it's the 5% or any portion of the 18%, that's 17% that's negotiable, those do appear alongside the partner use TA in the TA tables. So you're definitely going to want to collaborate closely with your state coordinators again to make sure that you have the right kind of tasks associated with the 5% money and any of the other TA that you have in the project so that you can actually meet those TA requirements associated with FA implementation.
Dave is asking, you mentioned that NRCS has developed a template for PPAs. Is that in the portal? And the PPA itself is in the portal. We have, Word document versions as well. Again, once you get into things with your coordinator, they'll be able to share all of those templates with you. I'm not sure how your name is pronounced. It looks like Tejan or Tejan asks, can we charge against the RCPP funding prior to the agreement being signed? Not only can you not charge against RCPP when your agreement is signed, but you have to wait until you have a supplemental agreement if you're talking about technical assistance that you want to charge against NRCS or RCPP funding. Again, the PPA does not obligate any funding. All funding is obligated through producer contracts or easements, or in the case of technical assistance, the partner's supplemental agreement. So you have to wait until you have a signed and executed supplemental agreement before you can start charging against your project. Larry's asking, when can we start accounting for partner contributions? Again, by statute, that date is April 26th, the date we made the awards. But again, you just want to make sure that, that anything you're charging before you start talking and getting into your PPA, that it's eligible and will ultimately be included in the PPA. Kurt C. is asking, what is an example of a policy waiver? And the examples are escaping me. Seth, Russell, do either of you have, I think Russell's actually had to leave us. Seth, do you have any thoughts on?
I think the simplest way to think about it is anything you see in the APF that you really think is crazy, you could ask us for a waiver for. Our ability to approve those waivers is going to be tied to fairness in the competition and implementability. So, for instance, in a prior AFA notice of funding opportunity, we said that the maximum share of an entity held easement, a federal share of an entity held easement would be 50% with the U.S. right of enforcement or 25% without a U.S. right of enforcement. And then we had some questions come up, and we said, well, maybe there's cases where we might allow that 25% number to go up just slightly in the no right of U.S. enforcement if we had other measures in place and, certainty was high that it was going to all be hunky-dory with that particular easement. That would be a policy waiver because it was something that was written in the notice of funding opportunity, and our ability to approve it would be based on careful consideration of the case details to determine whether or not we could maintain the fairness of the selection process and the implementation of that payment in a fair way and in a trackable way. We might or might not approve that particular waiver request, but that would be an example.
Thank you, Seth. I have time just for a few more questions. We are, we'll have a transcript of all your questions, and anything we don't get to, we will try to reach out to folks directly to make sure that you get your questions answered. Susan, our RCPP coordinator there in Hawaii, makes a very good point, something I forgot to mention. This time around, we're in the unfortunate position of reducing many of our award amounts below what partners asked for in their proposals. We tried to spread the funding a little bit further this time, and so many partners are facing a smaller project than they had intended. In those cases, partners have the opportunity to take another look at their contributions, reduce their contributions as long as their overall contribution ratio is not reduced from what was in your proposal. Very good reminder, Susan. Thank you for that. Seth, can you get into a little bit about calendar year versus fiscal year? I mentioned earlier that folks may want to postpone their FA activities until 2022. Can you talk a little bit about the calendar year versus fiscal year approach there?
Absolutely. So in the portal, the deliverables are set up with a column that says calendar year heading. And as everybody knows, NRCS really follows our fiscal year practices most of the time. So in following Kari's advice and thinking about when to schedule your first FA obligations, if you put calendar year 2021, for instance, that does actually allow us to conceivably do those obligations in the first 3 months of fiscal year 2022, October, November, December, right? That would be legit. That would be one way of achieving the goal. It gets a little more particular, though, when you get over to the supplemental agreements, because then we start to talk about both month and year. So when you're coordinating your, for instance, TAI expenses with FA obligation expenses, there's some overlap there, and you need to think real closely about calendar versus fiscal. There's also some flexibility. When you look in the PPA template, we allow up to 6 months late on any deliverable, FA deliverable for obligation or contribution deliverable for delivery, such that even if you put 2021, as long as everybody understands that it may slip into early 2022 calendar year, still 2022 fiscal year, that's probably going to work out just fine. We're just trying to get you on notice that there are complexities associated with our sign-ups, getting eligible producers, getting the planning done to a sufficient level to obligate a contract, et cetera. All those things take time. It may or may not be in your particular state a little bit difficult to get those things done this summer. That's why we're encouraging you to think about fiscal year 2022 and how you decide to record that in the PPA as calendar year 2021 or to calendar year 2022 is, again, a conversation you may want to have with your state coordinator as to when they think realistically it's going to happen in your watershed or project area.
Okay. Thank you, Seth. And, hey, we're just bumping up against 4:15 here in the East, and I'll just say that there's lots more questions in the queue here. We're never going to get to all of them. But as I said, we will have a record of them all, and I will make sure that we get answers back to everyone that we were not able to respond to here on the webinar. Let me just wrap up again by thanking you so much. As I say time and again, this program is only as good as our partners, especially our lead partners who are stepping up to take the responsibility to submit proposals, to manage these projects. Without good quality proposals and amazing projects, we are nothing, really. This is entirely driven by you all. So just want to thank everyone again for participating in RCPP. We hope that you have a good experience and that you'll be induced to apply again in the future. And, we're always here at the national office if folks really need our help. But, again, most of anything you'll need can be accessed there through your state office. And, again, we encourage you to get started with your coordinator just as soon as you are able and you're able to get up with your coordinator. And we look forward to your project getting started. So thanks so much, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your week, and talk to you soon.
That now concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.